Hello there! This video will be a bit different from what I usually do on this channel. Today I will be talking about a topic related to the Mario franchise and how its games have presented themselves over the last decades. It is a common sentiment that somewhere in the late 2000s or early 2010s, around the end of the Wii's lifespan, the Mario franchise became bland. This is often contrasted to Mario's era on the GameCube, which is often seen as more creative and, for lack of a better word, soulful. In more recent times, starting around 2017 with the release of Super Mario Odyssey, the sentiment has dwindled somewhat, especially after the last two Nintendo Directs in the latter half of 2023, which saw the announcements of remakes of various beloved titles and games that are deemed more creative than what was seen in the 2010s. There has also been a theory floating around for several years that's related to this sentiment, about the so-called Mario mandates. The idea here is more or less that around 2007, Shigeru Miyamoto started to push back against Mario spin-offs that took the franchise in a direction that was deemed too extreme aesthetically. Mandates were supposedly put on the Mario franchise that kept its aesthetic and characters in line with the new Super Mario Bros. Series, in particular New Super Mario Bros. Wii. This is the reason Mario has supposedly been bland ever since. Of note is that there are many variations of this theory, as people disagree over the exact contents of the mandates, how strong they are, whether or not they still apply, and which games fall under them. There are a couple of important sources that underlie the theory and often come up. Two colleges explaining the idea and interviews about the Paper Mario games that came out after Super Paper Mario. Paper Mario had a big tonal shift after that game and is often thought of as the series that was hit the hardest by these mandates. In general, a lot of this debate is based on specifically selected examples that are meant to prove or disprove the existence of the mandates. A more general view of how the relevant aspects of Mario's spin-offs developed over the last 3 decades is missing, which is something I want to address in this video. I want to investigate the theory of the Mario mandates, because it has been a topic of fascination to me for some time. I have done this by looking at how the aesthetics of areas in these games evolve, which playable characters appear in them. I will also zoom in on certain examples or bring up other relevant cases for the purpose of broader discussion. Now, without further ado, let's get into the meat of things. Let's start with the areas in various Mario spin-off series. Concretely, I looked at which areas borrow from existing games, and which just have aesthetics that were invented by the game itself. For this, I didn't look at every Mario spin-off, but those that feature a number of playable characters and distinct areas. Mario Kart, Mario Party, Mario Golf, Mario Tennis, Mario Baseball, Mario Strikers, miscellaneous Mario sports titles, Mario vs Donkey Kong, Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, Itadaki Street DS, Fortune Street, Mario plus Rabbids, and Dr. Mario World. Note that this only applies to games that were released before 2024. Besides Paper Mario and Mario & Luigi, which will be addressed at various points in this video, these are the games I feel are most often brought up when the mandates are discussed. Aside from that, I decided not to include Super Smash Bros. Because it is not a Mario series, nor the tracks from Mario Kart Home Circuit, because the only aesthetics that can be analyzed from its tracks are literal PNGs. Furthermore, I also did not consider retro tracks or remakes, because they were often redundant to include, as they do most of the time not differ significantly from their original versions. Few Mario Kart 8 retro tracks are the exception to this rule. Lastly, I didn't look at Mario Party's minigames because this project was already daunting enough as is, without considering the 1064 minigames in that series, not counting those remade in Mario Party the Top 100 and Mario Party Superstars. What does the mandate theory say about this topic though? The colleges mentioned that in the past it was more common for the mainline series to bleed into the spin-offs, with Sunshine being an example that is specifically mentioned, and this ceased after 2007. Or, phrased another way, if it wasn't in New Super Mario Bros. Wii, it can't be included. Mario Galaxy and 3D World are not drawn upon as much because they were before the mandates, according to the colleges. From categorizing the areas of the spin-offs, I want to say most of this doesn't hold true. In the vast majority of cases, Mario spin-offs invent their own aesthetics and do not borrow from a specific game in particular. More than 400 Mario Party boards, baseball courts, golf courses, kart tracks, etc. are original, while only about 250 can be traced back to another game in some way. These are based in the Mario universe most of the time, though some series were prone to include more realistic generic areas. This was mostly seen in the Mario Bros series, where only the last few courses are actually steeped in the Mario universe, to a lesser extent the Mario Tennis titles, which always include realistic grass, clay and hard courts in addition to Mario based courts. That said, the Mandate College mentioning Sunshine was onto something. It did get referenced more in the past than it is now. But this is not because of the mandates. Rather, a broader pattern is present in areas that do reference specific games. They often draw aesthetics from the most recent game in the series. Looking at the 3D Mario series, before Sunshine came out, it was Super Mario 64 that got referenced a lot. This became less and stopped after Sunshine's release. Sunshine references in turn taper off after 2008, right around the time the first Super Mario Galaxy released. Both it and its sequel continued to be referenced throughout the 2010s, contrary to the claims of the Mandate colleges, alongside Super Mario 3D Land. The only outlier here is Super Mario 3D World, which has been referenced more in recent years alongside Super Mario Odyssey. And it's not only the 3D Mario series that this holds for. The first Donkey Kong Country, similarly, was referenced pretty consistently right up until the release of Donkey Kong Country Returns. That game introduced a new general aesthetic for the Donkey Kong franchise and has been carrying the torch since. Same goes for Luigi's Mansion and its sequel, Dark Moon. Luigi's Mansion 3 has not been referenced yet in particular, but this might change in the future. Its studio, Next Level Games, seems more content to reference Dark Moon for now though. This trend is why we don't see Sunshine referenced as much anymore as in the past. Let's also back up a bit, as there is another development that I noticed while categorizing the areas in Mario spin-offs that is instrumental in understanding how the aesthetics of Mario changed in the last few decades. For the 2000s, it is safe to say Mario didn't really have a consistent art style. This was especially apparent in the 80s, where the appearance of Mario and artwork would change a lot from game to game. But the art was homogenized in the late 80s and early 90s, when animation artist Yoichi Kotabe started to become more involved at Nintendo. However, at the same time, each new console generation also boasted more graphical fidelity than the last, and so in-game art would also change a lot as a result. This was especially the case when Nintendo made the jump from making 2D to 3D games with the Nintendo 64. As a lot of in-game models ended up looking rough and early 3D renders were not able to capture the full finesse of the art made by Yoichi Kotabe. However, by the late 2000s, the graphical leap each console generation made started to slow down. The jump from Nintendo 64 to GameCube gave a very noticeable graphical upgrade. From the GameCube to the Wii, or from the Wii to the Wii U, the upgrade was far smaller. Nintendo's handheld consoles lagged behind in this regard, as they didn't start to run true 3D games until the DS, but also did not lag behind in a sense, as the look of the handheld games was often comparable to the respective home console that was out at the time. Due to this, there is no real equivalent to the Nintendo 64 within the Nintendo handheld lineup. The DS's games look more similar to GameCube ones. The point of pointing this out is that over the 2000s, as the acceleration of graphical fidelity started to slow down, we also saw Mario gaining a consistent art style. The current look of many of the mainstay characters was defined by titles that came out on the GameCube. Mario was not the only series that went through this process either in this time. Legend of Zelda changes its aesthetics every few games. There's a few iconic elements like the Wing Crest, Master Sword and Hylian Shield that remain consistent throughout. Master Sword and Hylian Shield had varying designs throughout the series until Twilight Princess, and that same game standardized the iconic Wing Crest design after the Wind Waker introduced the concept, but did not have a consistent design for it yet. That game in turn originated the Toon art style, which would remain in use in many of the 2D games in the series going forward. Or take the Metroid series, where Samus got her current Zero suit design with Metroid Zero Mission, by having varying undersuits and hair colors beforehand. Or the Fire Emblem series, where many of the characters from the first 4 games had varying appearances in their sprites, manual art, and in the official trading card game, which has been used as a source for official art in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, for example. Starting with Fire Emblem Thracia 776, which came out in late 1999, this stopped and characters had always one clear design since. Back to Mario, in the early to mid 2000s, Nintendo was still transitioning to the modern art style. When it comes to characters, during the development of Super Mario Sunshine, Miyamoto mentioned that Nintendo created standard designs for the Mario cast instead of redrawing them for each individual game. This didn't happen for each character at the same time, however, and leads to some strange cases where the modern designs exist alongside designs from the N64 period. In Luigi's Mansion, for example, Mario looks more or less like what we would recognize him as today. However, Luigi's model looks like a stepping stone between how he looked during the N64 era and his modern design. And we have these semi-modern designs appearing alongside stars and poison mushrooms that clearly have N64 designs. Other examples include the blue blocky thwomps, which were not phased out until Super Mario 64 DS in favor of a design more based on their appearance in the classic 2D games, or a precursor to the current Super Mushroom design appearing in Mario Kart Double Dash and Super Mario 64 DS. There was still consistent art direction in this time, mostly based on, though not directly referencing, Super Mario Sunshine. Games like Mario Kart Double Dash, Mario Parties 5 through 7, the two Mario baseball games, Mario Kart DS and Mario Kart Wii all share this similar style, and I believe this is what people are talking about when they talk about the GameCube art style. At the same time, a lot of these spin-offs also have their own visual identity. You would not soon confuse a course from Mario Golf with a Mario Kart track or a baseball court. Here I must give another point to the Mandates College, as these diverging identities did start to become distinctly un-Mario in the cases of Super Paper Mario, Mario Strikers games, and Mario Party 8. Super Paper Mario had an art style heavily steeped in late 90s digital graphics, which strayed far from its two prequels. Mario Strikers and Mario Party 8 started following the late 2000s trend of more realism in their aesthetics, that games like Super Smash Bros. Brawl also followed. The result is various areas that I'd be hard pressed to call fitting for the Mario universe. However, I do not necessarily think that this is the source of what happened next. That seems more to be the result of the Mario series finishing to define its art style. While the characters received their modern designs in the early 2000s, the Mushroom Kingdom as a location did not until several years later. The depictions of the Mushroom Kingdom up until this point varied a lot, grassy plains and domed hills being some of the few consistent elements. Even then, the specifics of these elements varied greatly. This is likely because up until New Super Mario Bros., the only mainline games set in the Mushroom Kingdom were Super Mario Bros., All-Stars remakes, and Super Mario 64. And none of these games gave the Mushroom Kingdom a defined aesthetic, mostly due to hardware limitations. The exception is perhaps Super Mario All-Stars, which is likely the source of the aforementioned domed hills. Even then, its Mushroom Kingdom looks strikingly similar to Super Mario Bros. 3's Grassland. This changed with the release of New Super Mario Bros. Wii. While its DS predecessor was the first mainline game to return to the Mushroom Kingdom, its aesthetics really only influenced Mario Kart Wii to a big extent. New Super Mario Bros. Wii is the game that ultimately stuck, and from then on, most games with locales in the Mushroom Kingdom would at the very least include its rendition of the domed hills, or those introduced in New Super Mario Bros. 2. This extended to other mainline titles like New Super Mario Bros. U and Super Mario 3D World, but also games such as Mario Kart, Mario Party, Mario Golf, the Mario and Luigi games, Paper Mario Sticker Star, and Mario vs. Donkey Kong. There were also games like Mario Kart 8 and Super Mario Odyssey, which used their own aesthetics for the Mushroom Kingdom, but they are exception rather than the rule. In this regard, the Mandates colleges were once again onto something, but it doesn't tell the whole story. Mario spin-offs continue to invent their own aesthetics and visit unique locales, as much after the release of New Super Mario Bros. Wii as they did before. Same goes for referencing games. Which games get referenced did change, but that has always been so. In general, I think it is a positive development that the Mushroom Kingdom gained a more consistent style, as it helps to ground it as a location in the Mario universe more than the more varied depictions of previous eras. And, while working on the script, I had a realization. In categorizing the various spin-off stages, I decided early on not to include a certain building, because I thought of it as a generic Mario location without much further thought. Only later did I realize that this is exactly how the new Super Mario Bros. Wii base aesthetic is deemed. I am of course talking about Peach's Castle, as it first appeared in Super Mario 64. This went on to become a mainstay of the Mushroom Kingdom as well, mainline titles and spin-offs alike. And I did go back to check how much it appeared. It was far more than the domed hills from New Super Mario Bros. Wii. Also counting titles that fall outside of those I initially wanted to take a look at. It can be argued that the appearance of Peach's Castle has changed much over the years, and this is correct. But so have the domed hills that more or less started in their current incarnation with New Super Mario Bros. Considering this, I find these hills and Peach's Castle much alike in how they developed over the years and became mainstays of the Mushroom Kingdom aesthetic together. That said, not everything has to look like New Super Mario Bros. Wii. I think it is best when the domed hills or other aspects of the game that act as signifiers of the Mushroom Kingdom are mixed with original aesthetics so spin-offs can continue to have their own identities as well. Mario Golf World Tour and the Mario & Luigi remakes are examples of games that do this well in my opinion. Is perhaps also indeed a bit more relaxed in recent years, as the Super Mario RPG remake didn't have modern elements for example, but it also falls in the trap of having modern designs existing alongside older outdated designs, which is jarring. But the modern influence also still holds if one looks at the brief depiction of the Mushroom Kingdom in Super Mario Bros. Wonder for example. Now for something different again. While researching the areas in Mario spin-offs, I came across a lot of areas that reference things in neat ways. Here are my 5 favorites in no particular order. The rendition of Bowser's Castle from Super Mario RPG appears in the background of the Bowser Castle court in Mario Power Tennis. This is the only reference to Super Mario RPG I found, aside from more medieval depictions of Toad Town like in Mario Kart Wii that may reference it, but I didn't end up counting. I was quite surprised to see this as I thought the RPGs do not get referenced like this in older Mario series, so it was neat to see. Also keeping in mind most Bowser's Castle inspired stages do not reference anything in particular. And Mecha Bowser from Mario Sunshine appears here, which is neat too, although I didn't count him as a Sunshine reference because he is a character and not part of the stage. The DK Jungle Court, also from Mario Power Tennis, is a case where aesthetics are mixed in an interesting way. The court obviously draws a lot from Donkey Kong Country, as Kremlings and claptraps are present and a minecart track can be seen in the background. However, the textures of the hills and plants surrounding the course are highly reminiscent of the aesthetics of Mario Kart Double Dash, specifically forest courses like DK Mountain and Dino Dino Jungle. This mix creates an intriguing contrast in my opinion. The Bowser Badlands from Mario Golf Toadstool Tour are nothing special for the most part, though they do depict the luscious side of the Koopa Kingdom. I want to draw attention to its second hall though, which has a ghost house that looks remarkably similar to Big Boo's Haunt from Super Mario 64, even as the back door that leads to the room behind the Shy Boo painting in Super Mario 64. I found it neat to see this alternative rendition of Big Boo's Haunt. Diamond City track from the Mario Kart arcade games is a real treat. It is here representing WarioWare, the Mario sub-series that get referenced the least by far aside from Wario Land. It is nice to be able to drive around in the city and spot references to the series, while the track also references Professor EGAT through the Big Gat Science Incorporated store and the Starbeats Cafe on the other side of the road. The last example comes from Mario Kart again, specifically one of Mario Kart 8's retro tracks. That game's interpretation of Ribbon Road was vastly different from its original incarnation in Mario Kart Super Circuit, heavily changed for the better in my opinion. Now it takes place in a giant bedroom filled with toys, and it is those that catch my attention. There are miniature carts from the game, yarn Yoshis from Yoshi's Woolly World in the background, and most notably mini Toads from the Mario vs Donkey Kong series that act as the audience. All in all, a nice collection of Mario based toys from its various sub-series. Now, let's get back onto the main topic and the second part of this analysis, characters. For those, we have a bit more insight in how Nintendo deals with them internally, mostly thanks to the Paper Mario interviews mentioned in the introduction of this video. According to Paper Mario series producer Kensuke Tanabe, the change in the series' direction came about due to two suggestions made by Shigeru Miyamoto during the development of Paper Mario Sticker Star. Story was needed to a far lesser extent in the series, and the series should use characters from the Super Mario world as much as possible. During the development of Super Mario Galaxy, Miyamoto had apparently been able to put the essence of Mario into words for the first time. You would often think that characters designed by new employees were no good, and have to explain why, forcing him to put the essence of Mario into words. According to himself, Miyamoto also began to question the need for story in Mario games around that time, which is honestly a whole topic on itself and something that falls outside the scope of this video. However, Miyamoto is not the only factor when it comes to the change in character designs. Tanabe also mentions an IP team called the Character Design Group that approves and rejects Mario character designs. For example, this group is involved with the designing and branding of Amiibo. In the interview, Tanabe mentions them in relation to a mural found in Paper Mario Sticker Star that was in their opinion too grotesque and so had to be toned down. Miyamoto can seemingly override them, as he was okay with the original design of the mural and it made its way into the final game as a result. Interviews about later Paper Mario games, Tanabe would go on to claim that his team was not allowed to change the design of certain Mario characters like Toads, likely alluding to the character design group, as he also claimed that Miyamoto was rather hands-off during the development of these later games. This group seems to have existed since at least the early 2000s, and Miyamoto alluded to its existence long before the supposed implementation of the mandates. Other second and third party Mario developers have mentioned an IP team they had to discuss character designs with. Alpha Dream employees mentioned heated discussions with the team, and several rejections of the designs for Dreambird from Mario & Luigi Dream Team, but in general seem to have gotten more leeway than the Paper Mario team. The same goes for the Ubisoft team that made the two Mario + Rabbids games, which was told in the beginning of its collaboration with Nintendo that they could ask anything and at the worst receive no for an answer. This can also be seen with the developers from Camelot, the studio behind the Mario Golf and Tennis games. When designing new characters like the Madame Mirage boss in Mario Tennis Aces, they had to argue a lot with Nintendo and make sure she fit in with the Mario universe. Despite that, Nintendo did not place limitations on the story Camelot wanted to tell. Mario + Rabbids director David Soliani put it best perhaps. It depends on each different team and what they are willing to ask. When it comes to Paper Mario, Tanabe expressed a certain trepidation about staying within the bounds of what constitutes only characters from Mario, after Miyamoto made his comments in an interview about Paper Mario Color Splash. In the earlier Iwata Asks about Sticker Star, he also seems to be unaware of many friendly Mario characters that have appeared in the mainline 2D and 3D games over the years, citing only Toads as examples, indicating this also limited his ability to ask to use those other friendly characters. This, in combination with the stricter enforcement of the IP rules by the character design group, where Super Paper Mario strayed far from the Mario series aesthetics, may be the source of the Paper Mario series' stricter handling of the guidelines. What is at least clear is that the character design group plays a pivotal role in deciding how characters in games made by second-party studios are portrayed. Miyamoto's realization about what Mario characters should feel and look like during Super Mario Galaxy's development and Mario's art style being finalized around the same time are likely the two factors that led to character designs becoming more standardized around this time. It's unclear, however, when the character design group was first established, or if it plays a role in the selection of playable characters for various Mario spin-off series discussed in the first half of this video. This is what I analyzed and want to mainly discuss in this section of the video. What Mario sub-series do the spin-offs most often pull playable characters from? What stands out when looking at that selection is that most playable characters are from the core group that most people would expect to be there by default at this point and are often seen as somewhat bland choices. This makes sense considering these characters received standard models in the early 2000s to be used in multiple games like Mario Sunshine and Mario Party. They were created by one team at Nintendo and shared with the other teams. What is also often forgotten about the characters is that the ones within this core group originate from a diverse sampling of the various Mario sub-series. There are representatives of 2D and 3D Mario, Donkey Kong Country, but also Mario Kart and Mario Sports Originals. Some of the characters that originated in obscure games would even go on to be promoted to the main series in various forms. All that is to say that the characters that form the core group should not be written off as quickly, as is often done, even if their presence has become expected over the decades. Other than this, few concrete patterns in what types of characters are chosen to be playable for spin-offs can be observed. One thing is that we can see very few playable Donkey Kong Country characters besides Donkey Kong himself and Diddy Kong nowadays. That human characters that appeared in games made by the studio Camelot have been entirely phased out. One notable development is that alt characters have become more prominent in the last decade. That's characters that are just variations of other established characters, like Pimple Peach or Tanuki Mario. Baby characters are arguably the earliest instance of this, though many of them originated as characters in the Yoshi's Island series first. These babies illustrate the difficulty with defining what type of character certain characters are as well. Take Baby Peach for example. She originated in the Mario and Luigi series, so she can be called a character from that series. Or should she be considered an alt of Peach? Maybe a character from Yoshi's Island instead, since she was playable there and many of the older babies originate from that series? And what about generic enemy species? In my analysis, I defined these as 2D Mario characters, since all the relevant ones first appeared in 2D Mario games. But their presence obviously extends a lot beyond that. Heck, what about Mario himself? He first appeared in a game that is technically not a Mario game, but a Donkey Kong game. But on the other hand, he is obviously the main character of the Mario series, and the character arguably didn't gain his true footing until the first proper 2D Mario game, Super Mario Bros. Perhaps all this shows is that the premise is flawed. The various series shouldn't be seen in isolation like this and more as an interconnected web, where each strand borrows from the other, remixing and redefining characters each time this is done. If we look beyond just the playable characters and in a more general manner, we do seem to see a drop in original characters. As noted before, Camelot previously made games that had many original human characters, and while their numbers bordered on an excessive amount, seriously there are like 90 of them, they just completely stopped appearing after the GameCube and Game Boy Advance generations, likely because the writers at Camelot got sick of writing stories about them. Professor Egad and Toadsworth, both characters introduced in prominent GameCube Mario games, many appearances throughout the 2000s in various Mario sub-series, before they vanished almost entirely in the 2010s. Nowadays, Egad only appears in the Luigi's Mansion series, Toadsworth only appears in remakes of games he appeared in before. In the Mario Party series, the Koopa Kids were replaced by Bowser Jr., while we do not see original hosts anymore. In the past, games alternated between original characters as hosts and more traditional Mario characters. The last few entries only have had those of the latter category, if there were any hosts at all. To conclude, there are both good and bad developments here in my view. In the past, when looking to the degree of stylization, there may have been games that went off the road with off-model characters. Super Paper Mario is perhaps the most prominent example. Games like the original Superstar Saga and the older Mario parties also have designs that go fairly overboard to the point certain characters barely look like what they are supposed to be. IP teams cleaning up such instances is a good development in my opinion, but such checks can certainly go overboard, like with the Toads in the Paper Mario games. First Paper Mario and the later Mario and Luigi games are probably the games that strike the best balance in this regard. Beyond that, maybe it would also be better if we saw less playable alts of existing characters and more characters from series that have been underrepresented in spin-offs, especially the Wario-centric ones. So, do the mandates exist? There are kernels of truth within the colleges that lay out the idea, also parts of it that do not make sense. It is telling that people who subscribe to the idea in general cannot agree on which games count as bland and which you don't, when the bland era is supposed to have begun or ended, if it has ended at all. On top of that, certain developments and patterns are ignored. Spin-offs in general tend to pull from the most recent mainline games for their aesthetics, and Mario's art style was more or less finished by the release of New Super Mario Bros. Wii, around the time that Miyamoto was first able to put into words what the Mario design essence is, or at least for characters. These last two factors may have influenced each other on some level, and they did seem to lead to a more consistent art style overall. However, at the same time, it is also disingenuous to claim that every Mario sub-series was hit as badly with IP restrictions as Paper Mario was, which in turn was also likely influenced by Kensuke Tanabe's and Aldo's trepidation around the subject. The reality of the situation is more complicated and multifaceted, and that strict guidelines were implemented one day and everyone had to follow them, as interviews with different teams show. Actual contents of the game show this as well, as designs in these older series were standardized far less than in Paper Mario. With Mario and Luigi, design limitations in later games were likely also caused by dwindling monetary resources as the years went on, given Alpha Dream went bankrupt after the release of Mario and Luigi Bowser's Inside Story plus Bowser Jr.'s Journey. In general, the larger Mario franchise is a web, where the different sub-series intersect at various points when it comes to what they pull from each other, with all of them also having their own visual identities. Mushroom Kingdom and Mario in general getting a consistent art style is a positive development, and some recent games leaning into this less is not something I particularly care for. At the same time, we could use a few more returning characters like Toadstool, or unique characters in the vein of Paper Mario for the Nintendo 64, or the Mario and Luigi series as a whole. Whether or not this has anything to do with the character design group is hard to say. The IP team is often made into a bit of a boogeyman. That goes a bit for the developments around Mario's aesthetics in general, though a bit more nuance in the debate wouldn't be out of place in my view. And that is more or less everything I wanted to say. I hope you enjoyed this video and hope to see you in the next one. Goodbye!